Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hi, I'm Megan, and welcome to this episode of Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we are joined by Adam. Would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Adam. I am a third year PPist at St Peter's, and today I'll be talking about, well, not today, I've only ever been on here once. I'll be talking about Oxford Jewish Society.
Great, thank you for joining us. And to get us started, could you tell us a bit about what the society does and what your role in the society is?
Yeah, so I think saying my role is probably easier. So I was on JSoc committee from for basically 4 terms, and I was the president during the summer term last year, which was kind of when everything was kind of really pandemic-y. So I don't really have like loads to speak about that, but I've kind of like been there kind of like through like in non-pandemic times and post-pandemic. I kind of have a brief kind of broad overview of kind of like how things work. What does JSoc do is kind of a more complicated question to answer, in that kind of JSoc is kind of responsible for most organized Jewish life in Oxford, and so that takes place in kind of a variety of different ways. So the kind of the most obvious way that kind of takes place is with respect of kind of organizing any particular like religious needs Jewish students could have while they're in Oxford. And so that means if there's like an issue getting kosher meals for students, or if students have any other kind of particular religious requirement, then kind of JSoc is kind of the organization that does that. But that's kind of a very kind of small part, but kind of quite important. And there's also, when we're talking about JSoc, we're also talking about there's 2 Jewish chaplains who I'm sure will be delighted if I mention them. So there's Tracy and Michael, who are the 2 Jewish chaplains for Oxford, and they are absolutely wonderful. And they kind of do a lot of pastoral work, kind of caring after students, making kind of sure we're all okay. And so that's really great. And so kind of that side. Then there's also kind of the more large organized social events. So kind of probably the highlight is Friday night dinner, which in like normal times, you'll be talking like somewhere between 80 and 100 people coming together for a cooked dinner. In kind of, at the moment, that's obviously kind of quite a different story, but in kind of regular times, and that's kind of, for like many people, that's kind of like the Jewish social highlight of their week. And then there's also kind of other kind of far more cultural events. So kind of probably the most famous one of these is Jewbilation, which, as well as being an amazing pun, is kind of a ridiculous night out. The concept is, and obviously this kind of feels completely absurd, kind of in the middle of a pandemic to describe this, but what happens is we kind of get the hall of the community centre, which imagine a church hall, and buy an immense amount of alcohol, such that it's all you can drink, and then play some of your absolutely classic like bar mitzvah songs, and kind of have a mad party. And kind of that, kind of just thinking about it now kind of feels a bit weird, but that's kind of like a very kind of important event, and there's lots of fun and everyone kind of likes it, and kind of it's also kind of like a nice opportunity for outreach. There's also kind of lots more kind of small niche events JSoc does, so kind of interfaith events, social action events, and kind of those maybe are less well attended, but kind of are definitely kind of an important part of the fabric of like Jewish life in Oxford.
Yeah, great. So you do everything basically. You do just about everything, and so stuff like these Friday night dinners. Is that just during term time, or is that something that's kind of throughout the whole year?
So typically it'll be term time plus maybe a week after term, maybe 2 weeks after term, depending on how many people are around, and maybe the week before. But kind of if there are enough students around, then often there'll be kind of informal, kind of non-JSoc related communication, but it's kind of de facto a JSoc event. Kind of people just kind of going to someone's house for dinner or kind of whatever like that. And then if that doesn't happen, so say you're stranded in Oxford in the middle of the summer, and there's not a pandemic on, then the chaplains who I mentioned before are usually very keen to kind of host people, and kind of if people want a meal or kind of don't want to get alone on Friday night, or for kind of any other meals, significant meals really, then that's kind of how that works.
Yeah, okay, great. So obviously it's the main events are when most students are in Oxford, but you know, if there are graduate students or people who stick around, then there are smaller events. Great. And then do you are generally all of the events only attended by people who are part of Jewish society, or are there some events that are open to more people?
I mean, kind of the kind of boundaries of who is a member of JSoc and who isn't is incredibly fuzzy. In that there's no real list anywhere which is a list of members. But typically most people who come to most events will be Jewish or identify as Jewish. If you want to draw a distinction between those two things, that's like another area which is really not worth getting into. Or will identify as Jewish. Although kind of we do get other people who come, and kind of that's always very exciting, and kind of anyone is more than welcome, kind of ever their previous religious affiliation or any other sort of affiliation which you may have to come to a JSoc event. In kind of COVID-y times, it's been a kind of a bit more strict about who we allow and who don't allow, just because, like, you know, if you can only have 20 people for dinner, then it makes sense to prioritize people, whatever. But kind of in normal times, it's basically a free-for-all.
Great. And obviously, talking about pandemic times, COVID times, obviously there have been quite a few very important Jewish holidays that people have been in Oxford for, haven't been able to go home for, and is that something that the society have kind of helped people celebrate as well?
Yeah. So it's kind of been, depending on exactly when the festival was, kind of basically impacted JSoc's response to it. So there was a few festivals kind of in kind of September, October time, and they were kind of more or less when things could kind of, given all the restrictions that were in place, those kind of took place more or less in person. We kind of found ways of organizing meals, organizing services, and kind of the services more done by the local community rather than us, but the local community found ways of kind of moving all of those things to kind of in a socially distanced format. The point where there was more of an issue was with Passover, which this year was, I think, early April, which was obviously kind of the height of everything. And so kind of then, and the kind of the other issue kind of with that is that kind of if an orthodox interpretation of how this festival should be celebrated involves not going on technology during kind of during the important moments of the festival, kind of for a few days at the beginning, and so that kind of very much limited the ability of JSoc, what they could do. But what JSoc did do, which was really nice, and I would love to take credit for this because I was president at the time, but like I had no involvement, was that they kind of got people to send kind of like things before the festival, kind of like, here's a poem for you to read each day, or here's a puzzle, you know, that, and kind of everyone did that and kind of helped each other a lot. There was also, I think some people recorded like an a cappella song together about which was kind of really nice. But so it's kind of, we've adjusted as much as we can, I think.
Yeah, of course.
But obviously it's kind of far less than ideal.
But you still managed to kind of find a sense of community and find a group activity.
There was some sense of, even though we're not celebrating this in the way we want to, that kind of Oxford JSoc as a group, kind of a broader extended group, there is some sense that kind of, you know, though we're physically apart, this is a bit cliche, there is some sense of kind of something which is binding us together. More than we just happen to know used to have dinner together.
Yeah, no, that's really great to have, particularly, you know, for students who might not have been able to celebrate with family, which is a huge thing. And so kind of, I guess more generally, you talk a lot about the chaplains providing more pastoral support. What kind of form does that pastoral support take?
So I think the chapter, it's basically whatever anyone needs. So kind of if there are people kind of with various personal issues, or kind of it's kind of both kind of on a personal and a religious basis. So kind of if someone goes to chaplains, like, I have this particular issue with this Jewish law, or kind of if that's on like a kind of, I want the college to help me accommodate me so I can stick to this, they'll help you with that. And it's also kind of like on a more personal level, like kind of if people are going through issues, kind of just like a kind of another, in kind of the same way, that there's some people who will just listen to you and kind of care about you, and will care about you, kind of whatever's going on, even if it's not kind of in any way directly related to kind of what they're employed to do.
Yeah, they're just kind of a point of contact, and a good ear to listen to you. Yeah, definitely. Which is sometimes very much needed during term times, or outside, definitely. And so you've mentioned that you were on the committee, and so for people who are interested maybe in joining the committee, or just want to know a bit more, could you just go through the roles in the committee and what you do?
So the exact configuration of the committee depends on the term, but more or less it's the same. So firstly, the committee changes every term, which is kind of fun in that it means everyone gets to kind of experience new roles, but also just like a little bit draining in that kind of, by the time someone's spent 4 or 5 weeks, or kind of has properly got into it, properly understood what they need to do, it kind of means, there's already a new person elected. And so it's kind of a bit chaotic. So there's the president and the vice president. They're basically like in charge. They run everything. Then there's the secretary, who is in charge of like basically emailing people and making Facebook events. Then there's a treasurer who like runs the money. Then there's 2 ents reps, who entertainment or events, depending on which interpretation you take. And they kind of run events and kind of try and like arrange kind of, JSoc is gonna have prees for this club on this night, or kind of not necessarily alcohol themed, but kind of more in that direction, kind of alcohol and kind of just general like social events. Then there's the interfaith rep, who is responsible for like interfaith stuff. So kind of they spend most of the time working with the Islamic Society and the Christian Union. Then there's the who else is there? The social action representative is basically responsible for kind of making sure JSoc fulfills its obligation towards the kind of broader community. Generally, that involves some sort of homelessness outreach, but that kind of depends on exactly what that person wants. Then there's the education representative, who is responsible for educating us, I suppose. I'm definitely gonna miss out a position, and I'm gonna get told off for it. I think that might be it. But so in the autumn term, there's a freshers representative. I think it might be 2 actually. And in the summer term, there's a finalist representative. That's kind of to make sure all the freshers, when they join, are kind of sufficiently well fed, and kind of all the finalists, kind of when they're at the point of extreme stress, also sufficiently well fed. I think that might be it in terms of committee roles, but something may randomly pop into my head later on. And I apologise to any JSoc members who like listen to this and I've forgotten it. Your role is appreciated. I'm quite forgetful.
Okay, so it's a very varied committee, basically. A lot of roles, and obviously, just you mentioned it, but it's very important to mention that even if you don't drink, the social events, the club nights are very, very welcoming. No one is gonna judge you or press you to drink or anything like that. That's just important to note. And so you talk about kind of the regular socials, the Friday night dinner, and are there any other kind of the smaller socials that you organize that are kind of a bit more sporadic? I mean, do you have any examples of those?
So it basically depends on whatever the president of a particular term decides what they want to do. But the general themes are, in the first few weeks of the autumn term, there'll be lots of kind of fresher specific events. And so kind of there'll be like a freshers coffee or a freshers baking session or something of that nature, and kind of in order to integrate the freshers both to each other and to everyone who's there already. And then kind of after that, it's kind of there's usually like a toast the term which is an excuse for JSoc to go to the pub and like buy one drink each and whatever. um, and what else? I wish I had like a term card behind me. And kind of it's sporadic. There's often like an interfaith formal, and so what that involves is people from JSoc, people from the Islamic Society, and people from the Christian Union, kind of go to a formal, and that's kind of with kind of the correct dietary requirements. So the JSoc people get a kosher meal, the Islamic Society people get a halal meal, and that kind of happens most non-pandemic terms. I think it was actually one last term, but I think it got cancelled. And then there's often like kind of different themed Friday nights. I know you asked not about Friday night, but the kind of different themes. So bring a friend Friday night, kind of bring an interfaith Friday night, and that sort of thing. Then there's often kind of like some homelessness outreach events. So kind of when I was the social action representative, we did like a coat drive, and so we kind of collected loads of coats and kind of other winter stuff, and then kind of distributed that. So there's lots, and that's the stuff I can think of off the top of my head, and we haven't had a normal term for nearly a year now.
Yeah, there's always something going on.
In the summer, there's usually kind of the plethora of summer events, summer parties, punting, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so you mentioned like a term card. Is that something that the committee produce every term with the events that are going to happen?
Yeah, there's kind of often kind of like immense beef between the president and the kind of various committee. It's like, you must have all your events to me by this date, and then kind of there's 2 events, and I'm like, we do that next week. But yeah, and if you're interested in kind of finding more about, can I tell people to put a link?
Yes, of course, I can put it in the description.
So there is a JSoc Facebook page, which has kind of all the information, and kind of the cover photo of the Facebook page will be the following term card, and kind of all events will get advertised like in that group. And so if you're interested in finding out more, check the link in the description.
It's good fun saying that.
Yeah, I've always wanted to say it.
But yeah, okay, so that's something that anyone can find and see if there are events they want to get involved in. And personally for you, what has your favourite part of being in JSoc so far been? Do you have a favourite thing?
I think what I really liked is having kind of a separate group of friends from kind of the people in college. And so that's kind of nice for 2 main reasons. Firstly, it's good, like it means kind of if stuff goes down in college, then kind of have another group of people who kind of aren't involved, kind of have no personal allegiance to anyone, kind of in any sort of drama or kind of anything that can happen. I think it's quite helpful. It's also quite nice to have a group of friends who kind of in some ways have a similar background, a kind of a similar way of seeing the world, and kind of JSoc has kind of allowed those friendships to kind of flourish. And yeah, that's been really great.
Yeah, I mean, more friends is always a plus, right? More people to talk to.
Yeah, precisely.
And you obviously, you've talked about society kind of helping students who need accommodations made by colleges. Do you also push for kind of those wider changes within the university generally?
Yeah, and it's kind of, you asked on a great day, because today was the day the university adopted the kind of internationally standardized definition of anti-Semitism. And so kind of there's a push on a kind of a university basis, more kind of those kind of broader big picture things, kind of how do we kind of deal with anti-Semitism, which is something I really haven't spoken about at all, but kind of is something which happens. And kind of, but more kind of the practical kind of day-to-day kind of nitty-gritty is almost always done at a college level. And like sometimes colleges are kind of weirdly inconsistent in that, and actually it's got a lot better in the past few years. And if you look on the JSoc page, there is, I'll name him because he'll be really delighted with this, Guy Dabby Jury made a survey of kind of all the colleges, what kosher meals they do for what meals.
Wow.
If you look on the Facebook page and scroll down enough, you'll be able to find that. And so kind of if there's anyone who's applying who's worried about getting kosher food or anything like that, then all the information on a college by college basis for breakfast, lunch, dinner and formals is all available.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Catering facilities at some colleges are, they're really variable.
Yeah.
So it's very important to know.
Also, some colleges kind of, if students don't want to use like electronic devices on Shabbat, then various colleges have put in processes to kind of accommodate for that, but I don't think there's any kind of recognized way of dealing with that. So like, if there's anyone who's listening to this who's applying and kind of is worried about that, probably speak to the chaplains, whose emails will link in the description. If they don't, I'm sure they won't mind.
We will check. And kind of maybe more generally, you've spoken, obviously there's a Facebook page, but how can people get involved in the committee, and how can people get involved in JSoc more generally?
The best way is just to turn up. In that, at the moment, it requires a little bit more booking, but it's still basically an environment in which anyone who is interested in coming to an event is kind of more or less entirely welcome. It's kind of, JSoc will be like excited to have more people, and yeah, just turn up, kind of join the Facebook page, find an event. Most of the events are public anyway, so you maybe don't need to join the page, and then kind of, yeah, just turn up and have fun.
Yeah. And how do people join the committee if they want to join the committee?
There is, in normal times, there is an election after Friday night dinner in fifth week. Fifth week is fifth week of term. And in pandemic times, there is an online election at some point. And it's just like a vote, and it's not very competitive.
Anyone who's part of the society can join, basically.
So I think for the purpose of elections, and maybe this is different at the moment, I haven't really been on top of it. I don't think anyone's been on top of it. It would usually be, if it's your first term, have you been to like 2 meals that term? If it's not your first term, have you been to 1 meal that term and 1 meal the term before? It's kind of quite a low bar for entry.
If you've participated.
Yeah, if you've kind of had some sort of involvement in JSoc. And kind of, it's a bit informal. If there's someone running for it and they didn't go to a meal last term, obviously I'm not in any way insinuating that we wouldn't follow the constitution, but that's exactly what would happen.
Okay, it's not a high pressure election.
No, it's not like it's not like you're running for prime minister.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
So that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us at Oxford from the Inside. And thank you to everyone listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube. And remember to follow us on Instagram at Oxford from the Inside. I will put some links to the resources, Adam, that you've mentioned. And until next time, bye-bye.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Bye.